Hey, how you doing today? I am Tequila Coleman. In today's video, we're going to talk about capacity. So a couple of days ago, over on our community tab, I put up a post and I was basically talking about during this divine separation, God is building your capacity for your spouse, and he's also building your spouse's capacity for you, right? And I had a few comments. They were like, Tequila, can you explain, go a little bit in details of what you're talking about here? And so when we talk about capacity, the definition for capacity means the maximum amount that something can contain or produce. The maximum amount that something can contain or produce. So whenever you see jealousy, intimidation, insecurities, fear, misunderstanding, whenever, you see these things present in, a God ordained love story, somewhere, this individual doesn't have the capacity for you, right? Or it could be the opposite. You probably was the one who was feeling the intimidation, insecurities, fears, right? So that would mean you didn't have the capacity for your spouse, right? And that simply means because what you don't have the capacity for, you reject it. You overlook it, right? Because when I have the capacity for something, when I have the capacity for love, I accept love. When I have the capacity, when I know I can fulfill this calling that's on my life, I step into it versus running from my calling, right? So the things that you went through in the beginning, right? When God told you that that's your spouse and maybe you and your spouse were dating or y'all were friends in the beginning, only for things to just end in rejection. That rejection happened because your spouse didn't have the capacity for you. And if you were the one doing the rejection, you didn't have the capacity for your spouse, okay? And I realized this early on because this was one of the problems I used to have in my previous relationships, right? Whenever I would talk to a man about, oh, God gave me this dream or God told me this, right? Whenever I would talk on this level with a man, he would become quiet. And then he would, begin to withdraw or label me as scary, or I'm crazy, right? All because I was hearing from God. And that used to communicate to me when it come down to the spiritual side, a lot of men can't relate to me on this level, right? Which also means they didn't have the capacity to handle me on this level, okay? So I knew this early on. I knew this way before God revealed who my spouse, is to me. And so we got to begin to understand when we talk about capacity. Number one, I want you to understand your own capacity for yourself. You have to know what it is that you are carrying. You have to know what you bring to the table. You have to know how you show up in this world. How are others perceiving you? You got to know this, right? And when I say how are others perceiving you, like don't count the people who perceive you in a negative light. No. Okay, because they probably don't have the capacity, to handle you, right? I walk in truth. I'm a truth teller. So a lot of people can't handle being told the truth, right? And so they would call me judgmental. They would say I'm harsh or I'm mean. No, I'm a truth teller and I tell you the truth, right? And it just, that's how they interpret it, to be mean, harsh, or judgmental, whatever. So when we talk about capacity, you must know and understand how you show up in this world, because where God is taking you, that land God has already given to you, when you get over there, there's people already over there in that land who's not going to have the capacity to handle you. There's going to be people over there that say things such as, you're doing too much. It don't take all of that. She thinks she all that. They're going to say stuff like this. But again, just know when you hear this language, it means they don't have the capacity for you. So you don't even got to get bent out of shape. You don't have to get upset. You don't even have to allow what they say to get in your beliefs, okay? Because they just don't have the capacity for you, right? So number one, we got to understand and know our own capacity, right? And then number two, I want you to begin to ask yourself, well, do I have the capacity to handle my spouse, right? The times when you were interacting with your spouse, did you feel any insecurities? Were there any intimidation showing up for you? Did you, what were your fears, right? Did you, were you jealous of your spouse or felt some type of jealousy, right? You got to begin to ask yourself, do I have the capacity to handle my spouse? Because if not, again, this is what God is doing during this divine separation. He's going to grow your capacity to be able to handle your spouse, because what God can't have happen is you and your spouse get in these marriages and the two of you are jealous of one another. That can't be. He can't have husband and wife competing with one another. He can't have the both of you feeling intimidated by each other anointing. No. So he has to grow us to a level of confidence, assurance, security, okay? Just believing, in ourselves, right? And seeing our own worth and value. This is what capacity is all about, right? So I want you to ask yourself, do I have the capacity to handle all of what comes with my spouse? And also know, I want you to go a little bit deeper in this too, because I want you to also help yourself to get understanding to why your God-ordained prodigal spouse responded to you the way how they did in the beginning, okay? It's time for us to move into a level of healing. So this is one way how you can do this, just by helping yourself to understand, why did my spouse really reject me? Was it really because they're not attracted to me? Is it really because, they really love the counterfeit? Or was it because my spouse didn't have the capacity to handle me at that time? Was it because, I offered love, but my spouse couldn't accept the love that I was offering because he or she had more hurt and hate in their heart? And that was the very thing that was given to me from my spouse, right? We got to help ourselves to begin to understand why certain things happen in the beginning of these love stories, okay? So that we can now move into a level of healing, okay? So this is what I'm referring to. Just know, God is building both of our capacity. He's building your capacity for your spouse and your spouse's capacity for you, okay? Because where God is taking both of you, where God is taking y'all to this land, you're going to need that capacity, okay? You can't step into this land with insecurities. You can't step into this land, jealous, right? You have to be able to handle seeing your spouse around other women. Your spouse got to be able to handle seeing you, with your outgoing personality, interacting and speaking to other men. They gotta, we gotta grow to that level, okay? We gotta grow into a level of confidence and assurance in ourselves, right? Knowing that this is part of the calling. My spouse gotta interact with the opposite sex, right? And I don't need to feel any type of way because I'm secure in my spouse's love for me. I'm secure, right? I know that's my husband. He know I'm his wife. So, I don't have to feel any type of way, right? This is where God is waiting on us to get to, okay? And God grow us in capacity in many different ways. One of the ways how God grows us in capacity, like how I stated earlier, how the man from my past, how they, when I would talk about God, how they, they looked at me as being crazy or different, and they'll get quiet. So one of the ways how God grows us in capacity is by giving your prodigal spouse their own encounter with the Lord. Right? God is communicating. He's speaking to your prodigal spouse right now. He's letting your prodigal spouse know in God's own way, he's God. He's more powerful than the devil. He chose you to be their spouse, right? He's communicating. So your prodigal spouse will know that God is real. They will believe in the power of prayer, okay? So you don't got to worry about your spouse, labeling you as different or weird, things of that nature, right? So God would grow us in capacity. That's one way. Another way is through inner healing and deliverance, So God is moving us into a level of healing. God will also see truth, and we are in a season where God is exposing. He's exposing lies and bringing forth truth, right? So once you are exposed to the truth, you can't bow down to no lie, right? And when God grows your spouse, your prodigal spouse, to a level of truth, those who walk in truth, instead of people perceiving you as being judgmental or harsh or mean, because now God has grown your spouse to this level of truth, now they're able to walk in truth and give other people truth as well, okay? So many different ways how God grows us in capacity. God will also put us in position in certain situations that requires for us to overcome certain fears, okay? Let's say your spouse had a fear of people, had a fear of man, and they just sat around and allowed your enemies to hate on you, talk bad about you, And so because God see all, he hear all. And so God said, okay, this is an area that my daughter or son, needs to grow in. And so he will put this person, your spouse, in certain situations where they get to utilize that muscle, right? Where they get to, God is so subtle. He starts small, right? He'll put your spouse, or if it's you in this situation, he'll put you in situations where you have to stand up for yourself, right? And it could be very small. It might start off with you just expressing how you feel to, your mom, right? But what God is doing, because he'll keep on bringing these type of, situations, scenarios around to help you exercise that, I'm going to call it the standing up for yourself muscle, right? To help you exercise that muscle, right? Because one thing God made crystal clear to me about 2 weeks ago, what God is doing in God ordained husbands, one thing God made crystal clear to me is God is tired of seeing his daughters neglected and being unprotected. He is forming, in Genesis to talk about how God formed Adam, from the ground. God is forming these God-ordained future husbands, and he's forming them to be, he's making them to be, strong, and he breaking up that fear of man, that fear of people, and he's teaching them, you are to protect your wife. You are to stand up for your wife, right? He's putting that in them, okay? And it's really just breaking off that people-pleasing spirit. That's what it really is. He's breaking that off of them, removing the muffle, the enemy placed on these prodigal spouses' mouth. He's removing that off of their mouths and having them, stand firm and bold, okay, up to the enemy, letting the enemy know, this is how I feel about my wife, He's allowing them, to get bold. It's time for us to have some bold husbands and wives, okay? That who will stand up, confess their love to one another, who will protect one another, who will support one another, who won't even care what the enemy is saying. They won't even care to that, okay? Because the love these two individuals have for themselves will override, okay, the enemies, right? So God, like I said, he's building our capacity right now. Well, all throughout this divine separation. And he's building our capacity to walk into these God-ordained marriages. And also, we need the capacity before we get to the land that God has already given to you, okay? So just know, like I said, understand your own capacity, how you show up in this world, what you are carrying, what you bring to the table, and also ask yourself, do I have the capacity to handle all of what comes with my God-ordained future husband or wife? If you know what your husband or wife, calling in, if you know where God is taking them, you got to ask yourself, well, can I handle that? If God is taking your spouse to the spotlight, can you handle, or do you have the capacity to be in the spotlight alongside of your spouse? If not, this is something that God is going to be working on you, okay, during this divine separation process, okay? So I hope that was clear. God wants us to be secure, confident, bold, okay, on fire for the Lord, okay? So that is it. I am Tequila Coleman. I'll talk to you all real soon. Take care.